In the vast ocean over 100 miles from shore, an unusual object is struggling amidst the large waves. No one could have imagined that what was floating there was a living creature, a German shepherd. No life vest, no boat, no hope. The Gulf of Mexico in the early morning was eerily calm. The water's surface was as smooth as a stretched mirror, with the sunlight reflecting off the gentle ripples, making the sea seem almost unreal. Lucas Hayes, a 40-year-old former Marine, now an independent fisherman, was on his old fishing boat nearly 100 miles from shore. He was used to the silence, the kind of silence that looms before every storm in the military. But the silence today made him uneasy. His instincts, honed through hundreds of special missions, whispered that something was wrong. In the vast sea, a strange object floated aimlessly in the distance. At first glance, Lucas thought it was just a piece of driftwood, a familiar sight after sea storms or shipwrecks. But there was something about it that made him frown. It wasn't drifting with the current, it was fighting against it. Lucas raised his binoculars, his hand tightened involuntarily as a pair of ears broke through the water's surface. Not wood, it was a dog. A German shepherd, dark in color, soaking wet, exhausted, still struggling to keep its head above the surface. No life vest. There is no piece of wood to cling to. No sign of a nearby ship, nothing. Lucas cursed and gunned the engine to full speed. Waves slapped against the side of the boat as he sped toward it. The dog struggled to lift its head, its legs flailing hopelessly. Clearly it had been in the water too long. White foam surrounded it, as if the sea was swallowing its last breath. Without thinking, Lucas plunged straight into the water. The seawater was bitter and colder than he had imagined, but he didn't care. All he could see were those eyes. Eyes no longer full of fear, only the silent instinct to survive. As Lucas swam toward it and wrapped his arms around the soaking wet body, he was startled. It was heavy like a corpse. But there was still a weak breath. The dog didn't resist. It just collapsed into his arms. It took nearly 5 minutes of struggling with the rope ladder before Lucas pulled them onto the boat. They collapsed onto the deck. Man and dog soaked through, gasping for air. Lucas turned the dog over and poured out the water, his heart pounding as he saw its chest still weakly rising and falling. "Damn! What the hell are you doing in this godforsaken place?" Lucas muttered, shivering as he wrapped a dry tarp around the trembling body. The dog didn't bark, didn't glance at him. It just lay there as if its soul had left. Yet its body was still fighting to survive for an unknown reason. Lucas gasped, his head spinning. He looked out at the sea, every direction filled with water and sky, no ship in sight. There was no rational explanation for the appearance of a dog abandoned 100 miles off the coast of the United States. But what chilled him the most wasn't the absurdity. It was the vague look in its eyes. Not desperation, not panic, but a quiet gaze, one that seemed to know the inevitable outcome but still swam, knowing that no one would come. Shadow. That's the name Lucas Hayes gave the dog. A name that resonated with mystery and carried a sense of sorrow, like a shadow abandoned by the world in the middle of the ocean, on the deck amidst the lingering waves, wind, and salt. Shadow lay breathing heavily, exhausted. Its black fur was wet from the seawater, skin blistered from prolonged exposure to sunlight and salt water, long bleeding scratches on its stomach and chest. Clear signs of hours spent swimming through treacherous waters. Lucas kneeled beside it, his gaze distant. He had seen bullet wounds, bomb injuries, and broken bones, but injuries like this, silent, seeping, slowly gnawing away at life with every passing minute, sent a chill down his spine. He leaned down, gently parting the wet fur around the dog's neck. No collar, no chip, no identification marks. But there was something, a small piece of rusted metal hidden deep in the thick fur as if purposely concealed. He wiped it clean with his shirt, shining a flashlight on it. One letter was engraved on it, S. Lucas squinted. No number, no unit designation, no name. It's just a solitary, cold symbol. Shadow, he muttered. And just like that, the nameless dog had a name. Shadow didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't tremble. It simply lay there, its amber eyes quietly watching Lucas. Not pleading or afraid, but as if accepting whatever fate was coming next. Lucas dried it off, wrapped it in a blanket, and gently dripped water into its mouth. Shadow's tongue moved slightly, a small signal, but enough for Lucas to know it didn't want to die yet. He didn't take his eyes off it throughout the journey back to land. Every time he glanced back, Shadow was still breathing, though weakly he had saved it. But what puzzled him most wasn't how the dog survived. It was how it ended up there over 100 miles offshore. Lucas had heard of dogs being thrown overboard by their owners, but this far from shore. Under such suspiciously calm sea conditions, a thought flashed, making him shiver. Could someone have wanted Shadow to die out there? A quiet death. No evidence. No witnesses. A shadow stirred slightly in its sleep. Lucas oversaw it, feeling more certain than ever this dog had been trained, and it had survived in an unusual way. He leaned back against the side of the boat, his eyes still fixed on the gray sky. One question echoed in his mind. Shadow, who are you? When Lucas Hayes's boat finally docked at a small pier in Venice, Florida, the sun had broken through the morning fog, but his heart was still clouded with unanswered questions. Shadow, the silent survivor, lay still in the back seat of the pickup truck, wrapped in a blanket and placed next to a warm water bottle. Although its breathing remained steady throughout the drive home, those eyes remained half open, watching through the window, as if keeping guard over something. Not out of fear, but caution, Lucas stopped the truck in front of a familiar veterinary clinic that had treated the stranded animals he had rescued from the sea. But this time, when the vet, Dr. Emma, gently lifted Shadow's ear to examine it, she froze Lucas. "This is unusual. What's wrong?" he asked as he stepped closer. She pointed to a small spot just inside the edge of the ear, a neatly shaved area that revealed a faded tattoo, barely legible with only a few scattered characters left. K9. Emma looked up, her gaze hardening. This is a marking from a high-level K9 unit used for the military or special operations. Lucas stood still. A chill ran down his arms. He repeated to himself, K9A7 Tactical Unit. Shadow didn't react, but Lucas noticed that when Emma read aloud those characters, its eyes flickered slightly, its ears twitched. He crouched down, held up 2 fingers, spread them out, and brought them back together. A gesture he had seen special forces use to command a dog to attack or lie down. Immediately, Shadow dropped to the ground, silently, its eyes sharp, focused, and alert. Lucas stepped back, his heart pounding. "It's a combat dog," he whispered. "Not an ordinary dog. It's been trained and is extremely disciplined." Emma stood silent, but why was it out at sea? Who would throw a K9 worth tens of thousands of dollars into the ocean like that? Lucas had been thinking about that question since he was in the middle of the ocean, but now a terrifying theory was beginning to take shape. That evening, Lucas sat in his old wooden cabin by the canal. Shadow lay near the fireplace, occasionally glancing at its new owner. The sea breeze blew gently, but it couldn't ease the sense of unease within him. He unwrapped the rusted metal fragment he had found beneath Shadow's collar. Under the yellow light, the scratches were visible. Marks as if someone had intentionally rubbed off, erased the identity. Why then he remembered. The faded tattoo behind its ear, the nameless metal fragment, no chip, no records. No one would throw away a high-trained dog in the middle of the ocean unless they wanted it to disappear. It wasn't about disappearing. It was about vanishing completely. A death that no one could trace, but Shadow didn't die. The next morning, when Lucas took Shadow outside, its gaze was directed towards the distant road. A black SUV slowly parked across the vacant lot. No license plate, no sound, and after standing still for 30 seconds, it silently drove away. Lucas knew. The instinct of someone who has lived through and survived special operations never lies. Someone had been watching them. That evening, Lucas decided to do something he had promised himself he would never do again. He started up the old laptop from his service days, a device that once connected to military security systems. When he typed in the final string of code, an encrypted file appeared. Project Shadow K9. Classification top secret, status decommissioned. Lucas looked at the project name and shivered. Shadow. It wasn't the nickname he gave. It had been the dog's code name all along. The file only briefly described K9 Shadow, Unit A7, Deep Sea Tactical Training, Mobile Reconnaissance, Soundless Response, Notes, extremely high. Loyalty superior, independent response, escape capability, above standard status. Decommissioned after the Fall Point event, reason for decommissioning, risk of losing control after mission leak. Shadow was asleep that night around 2 a.m. when it suddenly sat up and growled softly. Lucas hadn't had time to react before the back porch lights flickered. A motion sensor camera signal. He pulled out the handgun from the drawer. Not because he wanted to shoot, but because he knew this was no longer just about a stray animal. This was a covert war. The silhouettes of two men appeared silently near the fence behind the house. No flashlights, no badges. One of them crouched and placed something on the ground, a device to jam cell signals. Lucas motioned to Shadow stay still, but Shadow didn't need the command. It understood the situation. A soft sound came from behind the house. Then the back door's lock was broken. They were in. Lucas didn't hesitate. He pulled the floorboard next to the kitchen, a small tunnel leading to the swamp behind the house. Go, he whispered, pushing Shadow forward. As he crawled behind and pulled the floorboard back into place, heavy footsteps echoed on the wooden floor above them. One voice whispered, "I don't see the dog. Maybe he moved it. We need to confirm that Shadow is gone if he's still alive. He has data." Another voice, deeper and colder. "If he's still alive, we need to finish it. No one must remember Project Shadow." Lucas and Shadow swam through the swamp in the dark. The water was freezing, but the two beings, one man and one dog, moved like shadows, making no sound. They had become the targets, but that also meant they were carrying a secret. Others wanted to be buried. Reaching the western woods, Lucas stopped to catch his breath. Shadow stood beside him, eyes unblinking, staring at the light that slowly moved across the roof of their old house. Lucas clenched his fist. "They want to bury you, but now you're the only evidence." Shadow lowered his head, pressing his muzzle against his hand. Not in fear, but in readiness. Lucas Hayes drove the old pickup truck along the dirt road that led into the Appalachian Mountains, where he had once served many years ago. Beside him, Shadow sat still as a statue, eyes never leaving the cold mist ahead. Not a word was spoken, but inside the truck the tension hung like a string about to snap. Lucas was heading to find someone, a former military engineer, Julian Tressel, who had once been involved in secret K9 projects and may be the only person still alive who knew what was inside Fall Point. They arrived just as dawn broke a small wooden cabin nestled under the shade of an old maple tree. Power cut off, no signal. But Lucas knew Julian had never left this place. When the door opened, Julian looked at them in astonishment. "My God, it's Shadow!" Shadow didn't growl. He just stood there silent, like a ghost returned from the dead. In the dim yellow light of the wood stove, Julian spread out a map and an old file wrapped in plastic. Fall Point was a pilot mission. He whispered they were training K-9s for underwater operations, but not for rescue, for biological weapons reconnaissance. Lucas frowned. "What are you saying?" Julian tapped his finger on the file. Shadow isn't an ordinary combat dog. He was fitted with acoustic sensors, underwater positioning systems, and more. He saw what they wanted to bury forever. An illegal mobile base, something that could bring down a whole line of generals and contractors if exposed. Lucas stepped back silent. "And they think killing Shadow would erase the evidence." Julian looked him dead in the eye. "They tried, but he survived. And now, they're scared." As Lucas stepped outside to get some air, Shadow followed. The sky was a dense gray fog. In the distance, the faint hum of helicopters could be heard, a reminder that time was running out. "We need to get ahead of them," Lucas said, gripping the steering wheel as he returned to the truck. "Where to?" Julian asked, narrowing his eyes. Lucas turned and looked at Shadow, who was now staring out into the deep woods where engines were growing louder. "To where Shadow was trained. I'm not running anymore. I'm going to bring everything to light." Julian nodded and handed him a small USB drive. "This contains an excerpt from internal data I once backed up. It can only be decrypted at the old military center at Camp Redstone. If you make it there, the world will know the truth." Lucas took it. "Then Shadow and I will start from Redstone." That night, Lucas and Shadow left the wooden cabin and followed the forest path south, beginning the final journey to expose the hidden secret. They didn't know what lay ahead, but now they had each other, a man and a warrior carrying the S code. Shadow was no longer the hunted. He was the witness, the survivor, the spark. Lucas, Hayes, and Shadow reached the eastern gate of Camp Redstone at dawn on the third day. The camp had once been a military K-9 training base before it was shut down 7 years ago. But to Lucas, who had served here, every broken brick and rusted fence seemed to whisper secrets that had never been told. Shadow strolled behind ears, standing straight, muscles slightly tensed. Although weakened by days of running, he still carried the air of a seasoned warrior. The data room was deep underground, a soundproof bunker, originally the command center for special operations. Lucas had to use a makeshift copper wire from old electrical cables to open the broken electronic lock. When the door clicked open, a cloud of dust rose like eerie mist. "Try to remember." "Shadow," Lucas whispered. "You've been here before. There's something here that will unlock everything." In the dense darkness, they managed to turn on the emergency power. The old CRT screen flickered on, displaying the logo for the internal data system and a login prompt. Lucas plugged in the USB Julian had given him. The screen blinked, and then it displayed biometric authentication required. K9 code RS7. Lucas froze. They need Shadow to unlock it. He bent down and whispered, "Can you do it, old friend?" Shadow placed his paw on the biometric scanning surface, a worn-out sensor covered in a thick layer of dust. A beep sounded, and the system announced, "Match confirmed, RS7, asset recovered." The screen began to display a series of data program name Fall Point, purpose deploy K9s for secret biological handling missions offshore. Location: a mobile station underwater disabled due to a biological leak. Status: all personnel and K9s on site are presumed dead. Exception: K9RS7, presumed dead. Termination incomplete. Lucas held his breath. They knew Shadow was alive. They had tried to erase him, but failed. And now, using their very system, he was reading the truth the military wanted to be buried forever. But at that moment, A loud clang echoed from above the hatch. Lucas quickly turned off the screen, removed the USB, and signaled for Shadow to move into the shadowed corner. From the old ventilation speaker, a man's voice echoed. "We know you're there, hand over the dog, it'll all end." Lucas looked at Shadow, his eyes no longer fearful, but calm. "You threw him out to sea!" Lucas shouted, "I'm going to expose everything." Outside, hurried footsteps rang out. The special ops team was closing in on the camp. Lucas clenched the USB in his hand, turning to Shadow. "We need an exit." Shadow nodded slightly. Then unexpectedly, he ran ahead toward the escape hatch at the back of the bunker. Lucas had no choice. He followed after him. Behind them, the metal door was blasted open by a stun grenade. Ahead was an old tunnel, a path leading out to the forest's edge about a mile from the camp. They didn't know how many were chasing them, but now they had the most essential thing in their hands: evidence and the truth. The darkness of the tunnel felt thicker as footsteps echoed behind them. The people hunting Lucas and Shadow weren't ordinary soldiers. They were masked operatives, no insignia, no identities. Lucas kept running, clutching the cold USB in his jacket pocket. It wasn't just evidence, it was their lives. Shadow ran ahead, even though his legs weren't fully healed, still bearing scars from the days at sea. But not once did he slow down. They raced through the dilapidated maze of corridors, broken bricks underfoot, the dampness rising like the sweat of buried history. Then suddenly a northern exit appeared, narrow, with the faint light from the sparse forest outside. "Hang on, old friend." "We're almost out," Lucas panted, but just as they crawled out of the tunnel, a click sounded. Red laser sights pinpointing Lucas's chest. In front of them was a sniper hiding behind a stone mound. Aiming from afar, Shadow growled but didn't bark. He quietly flanked to the right. Lucas raised his hand, signaling to stay still, trying to distract the sniper's focus. In an instant, the bullet shot past Lucas's hair. But at that moment, Shadow leaped up, knocking the sniper down from behind. The sounds of a struggle echoed, then fell silent. Lucas rushed over, seeing that Shadow had a light injury, but the sniper was unconscious. "Not bad, warrior," Lucas whispered, tying up the sniper's hands and confiscating the weapon. They withdrew to an old cabin of one of Lucas's old friends, a former investigative journalist, Maya Lin, who had worked with human rights organizations. Inside the cramped room full of papers and recording equipment. Lucas handed her the USB. Maya looked at it. Her eyes widened. "Oh my God, this is Fall Point. I thought it was just a rumor." "It's no longer a rumor," Lucas said, "and there's a living creature to prove it." Shadow lay quietly beside him. Maya crouched down, and for the first time he allowed the stranger to touch his head gently. A few hours later, the story began to spread. Maya uploaded the first evidence to an international encrypted platform, along with a video clip of Shadow documents from Camp Redstone, images of the biological locator device, and an analysis of the military's termination order. The community exploded, spreading globally. Many veterans began sharing vague memories of untitled missions. Animal protection organizations and soldiers' rights groups also spoke out. But Lucas knew they weren't safe, because now Shadow wasn't just living proof, he had become the target. And those who wanted to bury the truth. I wouldn't stop a week after the truth began to leak. America became a whirlwind of information. News spread at the speed of light, the warrior dog left in the deep sea. Secret biological experiments exposed. But in the media storm, Lucas and Shadow remained hidden in a deep forest cabin in Colorado. Lucas sat by the fireplace, his laptop open, the screen displaying an invitation, congressional hearing, direct testimony, witness protection. In the corner of the room, Shadow lay curled up, his eyes calm, but his ears perked up whenever there was a noise outside. Lucas stared at the text, then closed his eyes. If they revealed their identities, Shadow would either be protected or hunted to the end. You're living proof, but also a living target, he whispered. Maya Lin, who had released the information to the world, sent a message via the encrypted connection. If you testify, the entire Fall Point program could be dismantled, but Lucas, they may strike before you even enter the hearing room. Lucas typed his response. I'm not doing this for justice, I'm doing it for Shadow. That night, Lucas sat beside Shadow. He pulled out the old metal tag, the S was faint, and carved 6 more words into it, with a small knife, still here, still fighting. Shadow looked up gently, placing his paw on Lucas's hand as a sign of agreement, the hearing. Washington, D.C. Lucas entered the room, Shadow walking alongside the leash light as a thread. The camera lenses followed their every step. In the audience were veterans journalists, and even families who had lost loved ones in training accidents. Lucas began his testimony. My name is Lucas Hayes, a former Marine. I found this dog 100 miles off the coast, not because it was lost, but because someone wanted it never to return to shore. The room went silent. Lucas presented the rusty tag, the images, the documents, and the DNA analysis from an independent lab. Then he bent down and placed his hand on Shadow's back. His name is Shadow. No one is to call him by a number anymore. He's not a tool, he's a witness, he's a teammate, and he's the reason I still believe in what's right. As soon as the hearing ended, the media exploded. The viewership surpassed 10 million shares within 3 hours. But while the media celebrated in another place, the headquarters of a former secret agency, a crisis meeting was held. Fall Point has been exposed, but other branches remain. Shadow knows more than we thought. And Lucas, he won't survive much longer. 3 days after the historic hearing, when Shadow's name became a global symbol, Lucas knew they wouldn't let it go. Early morning, a vehicle with no license plate stopped at the edge of the Colorado forest, where Lucas's cabin lay hidden beneath the old cedar trees. From the driver's seat, 3 men in black suits emerged. No badges, no words, just cold breath and indifferent gazes. One man opened a laptop connecting to a satellite. Target confirmed. Destroy the evidence, erase the traces. Lucas had just finished making coffee inside the cabin, his old Glock still at his side. Shadow stood by the window, motionless like a statue, but his ears twitched slightly. They're here, Lucas whispered. Right on time, like trust thieves. He stepped to the piece of wood behind the kitchen, pressing a narrow gap. A door swung open, revealing an underground hideout he had prepared a month ago. Inside, Lucas quietly ordered, but Shadow didn't move. Outside, the special ops team surrounded the cabin. One of them raised his hand. Approach silently, don't let it bark. But just as the first footsteps reached the porch, a click echoed. The mechanical alarm trap activated. Boom, a small explosion. But enough to shake the trees. Lucas and Shadow had already withdrawn 6 hours earlier. On the camera screen that Lucas set up at the cabin, he and Shadow were watching from a van parked 5 kilometers away. His face was no longer angry, only cold calculation remained. They think I'm just a fisherman by chance, but I served in Fallujah land, at a night swim team in the fire zone. I know this hunting game. Shadow sat beside him, eyes never leaving the screen. The counterattack plan began. Lucas sent an encrypted data packet containing evidence about the remaining biological dog testing stations to the International Investigative Journalists Group. At the same time, he pressed a button on the small device in his hand. In the distance, one of the 3 SUVs of the assassination group exploded, and the tracking system was disabled. A message popped up on the screen. Sent successfully, it will be publicly available globally in 30 seconds. Information warfare wins by speed. Lucas turned to Shadow. We don't kill them, we force them to fear the truth. Shadow let out a low growl, as if agreeing, a wolf no longer chained. Within 48 hours, secret facilities were investigated simultaneously. The U.S. Congress announced the establishment of a special investigation committee into the Fall Point project. In the deep Colorado forest, Lucas was training Shadow on the thin snow. Neither needed orders, only silent coordination, a perfect partnership, like two warriors born from the same storm. And this time they weren't just survivors, they were the ones leading. At the snowy peak of Colorado, Lucas's cabin was replaced by a small, simple wooden house, warm but modest. No more dense surveillance cameras, no more sleepless nights worrying about being hunted. Only the first peace after a string of days filled with blood and secrets. Shadow, or the new name to be revealed, lay lazily in the early morning sun, a strange but hopeful habit. That afternoon, a group of children from a nearby town visited. Lucas taught them how to read hand signals and haul a dog back to a task, but only with trust, not commands. Shadow circled the children, gently resting his head on the lap of the most timid boy. After undergoing treatment for his fears, the boy burst into laughter, for the first time in months. As they sat on the porch that evening, Lucas placed his hand on Shadow's neck, where the old tag with the letter S used to be. A new collar engraved with shining brass under the campfire's glow bore a single line, Shadow, the dog who chose freedom. In this world, not all heroes carry weapons. Some just need to remember run and never give up. Not all heroes wear badges, not all wounds bleed. Souls are carrying silent memories, waiting for someone patient enough to listen. Lucas had heard, and Shadow had been reborn, not as a tool, but as himself.